Have you ever wondered why nothing changes? Why modern politics is a hollowed out, empty facade, a haunting, offering only dead ideas from the past? In this conversation with the brilliant filmmaker Adam Curtis, we talk about that moment where Marianne Williamson, a candidate for the Democratic Party nomination, used epic language to describe the political conversation. And for a moment, it seemed like politics could move in a slightly different direction. Can it ever again? Can we ever reinvigorate politics? This conversation with Adam Curtis, taken from my podcast Under the Skin on Luminary, certainly might make you think that real change is possible. I've got a few things to say here. One is I think that the limitations of scientism, I would say not just the reference of economics and the sort of the centripetal point of economics in the limited apparent dichotomy of left versus right, even in extreme forms such as sort of communism versus free market capitalism. That the sort of philosophical accompaniment to that, the sort of soft power arm of that is kind of what I would call scientism. I'm interested in just that one moment from the Democrat primary campaigns where briefly Marianne Williamson was sort of part of the debate, where she said something along the lines of, "You lot," she said to her sort of co-democratic candidates, "are not going to be able to tackle the dark psychic forces unleashed by this man with this kind of moot sort of, bureaucracy." She said something, or technocracy. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she kind of indicated that great powers had been inadvertently or perhaps deliberately stirred by the sort of the phenomenon of the last 4 years. Now, evidently, of course, Biden succeeded, and again, I think we can already evaluate what's causing the dissatisfaction that leads to Trumpism in a kind of in the kind of values, aside from some sort of obvious sort of social justice stuff that anyone would agree with, I'm sure, in where power is being apportioned, the kind of appointments that are being made, and the kind of economic policy that's being reinstated, they don't inspire much. And I wonder, Adam, aside from the stories you're telling in your film, which of course sort of lead us up to this point, and one of the figures you study is Donald Trump, right? Or the one of the stories you tell is of Donald Trump from his sort of New York landlord days up to present day, and some curious relationships he has with other people you tell the stories about. I just wonder how you feel current American politics relates to particularly with the election of Biden, to some of the stories you're telling in your latest films.
I remember watching that primary debate with Marianne. Was she Marianne Williamson?
That's right, yeah.
I got into a lot of trouble with some of my friends for saying I thought she was really good, because, I know she's a hippie, and and you're a hippie, but she somehow, what I really liked about it, she suddenly started talking in a language that put things in epic terms. It just made me realize how narrow and how limited the focus of political debate has been. She made it epic. And I thought that was really quite exciting. It was a glimpse into something. But no, she was immediately kicked out, wasn't she?
Yes.
I don't know. I just thought it's a sort of, it's really, the language of politics has become so limited. You ask about American politics. Well, it's in boring journalistic terms, what I worry about is that Biden has appointed in his foreign policy many people who were effectively hawks both over Iraq and now over China. And I do think that one of the real problems of America is, ever since the Cold War, it's got to have this sort of fear thing. And it was Bin Laden for a bit, and then it was Putin. Have you noticed how Putin's rather disappeared?
Yeah.
And now it's Xi Jinping. And I just think that a lot of the people some of the people he's appointed to high positions in his foreign policy team are sort of China hawks. And we're going to get another wave of that, because there is a thing at the moment. And again, a lot of people are sort of happy. It reminds one very much of the Iraq War. Is a lot of people on the liberal left are also quite rightly concerned about the Uyghurs and the way that the Chinese are behaving in their mass re-education programs, which sounds really appalling. but you will get this strange alliance between the liberal right and the liberal left over China, very much as you did over the Iraq War. So what I'm really saying is it just what goes around comes around at the moment in liberal politics is that they need a threat at the moment. And I don't mean this is a universal thing. It's just at the moment, in the absence of any positive vision, China is going to fulfill that function. Whereas I think what's really interesting about China is that it may not be as strong and as much part of the future as we think it is. That it is as much a decaying political system that which is hanging on to power through mass surveillance systems and has no real ideas of the future. It is as sort of hamstrung by that as we are. Yet what they're going to do is they're going to turn it into this really frightening idea of the future. And I just think that's again, we're going to get preoccupied by that and not talk about how we can change things for the better domestically.
That's pretty cool. I think what Adam, it sounds like, and maybe this is something I'm remembering from the films, that these sort of apparent great sort of empires or states are hollowed out on examination. And I remember, like, when Grenfell happened, my mate James, who you know, saying, like, he lives around there, and he said that, like, when that happened, you realise that everything was sort of subcontracted by sort of 5 degrees, and there's no one there. There's no there. You go to the building, and it's been hollowed out. There is no council person that go, oh, sorry about all this, we'll better sort that out. And like that bin man getting sacked that booted the head off a snowman, he's like a subcontractor bin man. There is no sort of cohesive social alliance or contract or bond between us, that these things are sort of hollow and empty and held together by the conservation of dead ideas. And you're right, that doesn't suggest strength.
Yeah, dead ideas. That sums it up, really. That if you look at it, where are we at the moment? We're living in the attempt to keep stable what effectively in this country and in America since 2008 are pretty much dead ideas. I mean, it is very strange that we now have banks doing what's called negative interest. You know, they'll actually pay you to borrow money. It's odd. There's something weird about this. You know, the argument about Mrs. Thatcher and Ronald Reagan is that actually they weren't as successful as we think. That by the mid-1980s, they had failed to regenerate industry in America and Britain. The factories were closing massively. And in the face of that, they turned to the financial system to lend money to people. And they did that very successfully for 30 years. And lots of people, could go and buy and have a lot of fun with that. They also felt that their wages were going up even when they weren't. Yeah? Mm. That crashed in 2008. And since then, we've been stumbling along. And that's where we are. And it feels like a dead idea that we're trying to keep going. And I just think that maybe that'll change, but I don't know.
Maybe you're right. Hey, Adam, did you make a film for Massive Attack where you had loads of buildings collapsing that was filmed before 9/11? Like, or sort of they were clips from films. Is that right?
It was all those apocalyptic films from the 90s, which were all about people from outer space coming in and attacking. Actually, flying into buildings in New York and other places in America.
What were you saying with that?
I was trying to point out that one of the things of our time is that we imagined a dark dystopian future somewhere starting in the mid to late 90s. And that was expressed through those films. And why 9/11 was so powerful in our imaginations is it seemed to confirm those dark dystopian imaginings. They came real. And that catastrophe and that catastrophic effect of that, what seemed like a confirmation, really rocked our societies, not just America, but us too. And I was reading somewhere the other day was saying, really what we're living through is a series of catastrophes, which continually we have no idea of the dimensions of. So you have 9/11, then you have the banking crisis of 2008, the global banking crisis, then you have Brexit, then you have Trump. And then you have the pandemic, which is much worse than any of them. But it's a series of catastrophes in societies that, as you say, have dead ideas. So we haven't really got a story of where we're going, which allows us to put those shocks in proportion. I mean, I know that actually when a catastrophe happens, you're knocked sideways. But what we lack is, after the immediate shock, is an ability to put it into a sense of proportion. Our journalism tends to run out of control, and just the darkest imaginings come out. I mean, I'm not saying this about the pandemic at all. We have no idea about that, and that is genuinely terrifying. But with 9/11, with the banking crisis, with Brexit, with Trump, we get into these hysterias. And one of the things I find very interesting about the last 4 years with Brexit and with Trump is that whilst the experience of living through those 4 years was one of continual chaos, hysteria, panic, and distrust, if you actually look at what happened in Britain and in America over those 4 years, did anything change in the structure of power? Trump, as far as I can see, Trump's foreign policy, he did a few things, especially over Iran. Domestically, apart from reducing taxes for rich people, which is what I think Republicans tend to do, he didn't do anything else. That it was sort of, there was a weird disconnect. Inside our heads, there was this continual churn and hysteria. Every day, the newspapers would tell you about Trump and Brexit and Trump and Putin. Outside in the real world, actually nothing changed. The structure of power continued, the inequalities grew, the anger carried on, unanswered. It's a very weird time. There is this disconnect going on. And it's something to do with, well, I would say this, but it's the decay of the idea of the individual. We've gone inside our own heads, followed by the internet companies who love creating what they call high arousal emotions inside us. Whilst outside, actually, there's this complete frozen world.
That's interesting. That's interesting because it's sort of a correlative to the kind of value of cultivating an inner life that could create the conditions for change that we are discussing. Awakened, enlightened individuals that have a different relationship with the external world as a result of not living in a state of stimulation, but transcendence of that stimulation. Those 2 points you made there about the sort of split, like the theatre of Trump, the spectacle of Trump versus the sort of real change. I know that there'll be people listening go, oh no, but this happened and that happened and stuff. But of course, I am inclined to agree. And the sort of symbolic power of tragic events such as 9/11 all suggest this kind of play, this kind of theatre, and a word you used towards the end there is a kind of a disconnect between our inner lives, our feelings of reality, and the reality that we're experiencing. And I can see in this increasingly large margin an appetite is growing. An appetite is growing by the kind of the very people that were sort of condemned and abandoned in the discourse around Brexit and the conditions that led to it, and the people that are sort of criticised and abandoned around the sort of the polemicism in America. I feel that these are the very people that will benefit from new ideas, new approaches. And when you say, Adam, of course, a vision ultimately requires, particularly something that's sort of potentially global, obviously it requires a sort of a, central symbols, motifs and ideas. But ultimately, isn't it really going to be about controlling, regulating, and in some cases extracting power altogether from the places where power currently resides in order to empower individuals and communities to live their lives unencumbered by the sort of the unreasonable economic imperatives that are currently placed on them? If you're enjoying this conversation, join me over at Luminary for the rest of our discussion and for all of the latest episodes of Under the Skin. Go to luminarypodcast.com to start your free trial. See you there. It's a fantastic podcast network.